Chapter 161 Contemplations. There were many who suffered in the recent chaos, but there were also those who benefited the Awakeners. If any group grew stronger the fastest due to the chaos, it was them. However, a significant number also fell during the chaos due to their lack of initial strength. After all, not every Awakener was as power and money-hungry as Michael, Mira, and Lillian that started hunting monsters early on. These three, however, had grown considerably stronger thanks to the chaos. There was no need to mention Michael's growth was relentless, increasing by the moment. As for Mira and Lillian, both had managed to advance to rank 1 during the chaos. However, their quest completion results were far less impressive than Michael's. They had done the bare minimum to advance, which meant they reaped fewer benefits. Even so, reach ing rank 1 made them significantly stronger compared to when they were still unranked. Thanks to the cracks, they had also leveled up a few times. Though they were still far from reaching Michael's current height of level 20, both were still level 15, his previous level. He has new undead. Mira's voice broke the silence as she stood behind Lillian, who was calmly watching the local news on her phone. On the screen, a familiar face appeared. Michael. He looked slightly dirty, but completely unharmed. The news had spent minutes interviewing the survivors Michael had protected, before turning to question Michael himself and his unique summons. Watching how Michael barely responded made Mira sneer. He truly isn't one to talk, huh? She hadn't forgotten. That man had completely ignored her message and was still ignoring it now. She had sent him another message after the chaos settled, yet he hadn't replied. Annoyed, she debated whether she should just block his number. Yet, despite her frustration, she found herself feeling relieved that he was okay. I saw his undead carrying a griffin onto one of those hover trucks from the association. Lillian's sudden words made Mira turn to her. Do you think he's the one who killed it? Though she already knew the likely answer, she still asked. Most likely, Lillian replied without hesitation. Experience more tales on my virtual library empire. It shouldn't have been anyone else. And those griffins even move in groups. He was the only one defending his community. A brief silence followed. From everything they had seen, it was obvious Michael was strong. Extremely strong. And only getting stronger. Last time, he could easily handle rank 1 monsters. Now, he was dealing with rank 2 monsters. His growth was evident, and frighteningly fast. Both girls assumed his strength and rapid progression were due to an opportunity he received in the land of origin. But regardless of whether that was true or not, one thing remained clear: their classmate was becoming terrifyingly powerful. Even Mira, who had once been confident in her own special class and talent, now found herself doubting. How can I get a recipe for a bigger bomb? Contracting the long-arm monkey and sand scorpions went smoothly for Michael. Since he was already familiar with their skills after fighting them, he wasn't particularly excited about contracting them, though he was still satisfied with the result. When it came time to evolve them, however, that was when he expected to feel truly excited. The good news was that, thanks to their high levels, once they evolved into 1-star rank, they would likely approach max level, and after reaching 3-star rank, they should surely enter rank 2. With that done, Michael turned his eyes toward the two biggest prizes in the room: the griffin and the human mage. Between the two, Michael ultimately chose to start with the human mage. Though powerful, the mage was still, at the end of the day, a rank 1 creature. From what he had seen of Brian's ability to fly and the fact that level 4 creatures seemed to be rank 2, Michael began to notice a pattern. Level 4 appeared to be a turning point in the cultivation system. A level 25 cultivator was probably just a peak rank 1 being, and stepping into the master rank likely made them a true rank 2 being in the eyes of an awakener. Michael also recalled Brian's words about rank 2 awakeners gaining the ability to fly. However, he had sensed uncertainty in Brian's tone, so he wasn't entirely convinced. Still, the possibility excited him. Regardless of whether it was true or not, Michael felt that rank 2 must be an important milestone for Awakeners as well. Perhaps, at higher ranks, the power difference and unique abilities granted by each rank became even more pronounced. There had to be a reason why Awakener academies only accepted rank 2 students. It could only mean there was something special about that rank. But whatever it was, that level was still far from him. Setting aside those thoughts, Michael focused on the task at hand. He was about to attempt Undead revival on the dead human mage. His mana reserves were still high, so he didn't increase it outright. In any case, he had more mana than the human mage had when alive. With that in mind, Michael immediately got to work. After taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, he began Undead revival. Immediately, Michael felt a massive surge of mana being drawn from his mana pool, far more than he had ever experienced with any of the monsters he had revived before. Well, it made sense. This human mage was the strongest undead material he had ever attempted to revive. Unfortunately, and somewhat expectedly, Michael failed. His heart pounded rapidly at the realization that he only had one of this corpse. But after a brief moment of panic, he managed to calm himself down again. Undead revival. Chapter 162, Talking Undead. Michael didn't know why fate loved to play tricks on him, but he succeeded. Barely, on the last attempt. And it wasn't even because of mana. He almost lost to chance. However, since he had succeeded in the end, Michael was quite happy. Aurora human. Disciple rank Mage LV 25, max. Name, none. Key XP, 563,345 by 1,021,752. Skills, Earth Dome, Intermediate Mastery. Fire Spear, Intermediate Mastery. Fire Jet, Intermediate Mastery. Earth Wall, Intermediate Mastery. Earth Spike, Intermediate Mastery. Fireball, Intermediate Mastery. A master, Michael Norman. Michael was momentarily blinded by the panel. The first thing he noticed was the sheer range of skills the human mage possessed. Though none had reached advanced mastery, there was a wide array of intermediate and basic mastery spells. Should I say, as expected of a commander rank mage. It was an undeniable fact spell models used in the Aurora cultivation system were likely more advanced than the skills most Awakeners, at least the new ones, wielded. After all, an Awakener didn't need to study magic to grow stronger. Their skills naturally progressed alongside their mana, evolving in quality over time. But this was a brute force method. Magic circles. They were the formulas that structured spells' foundation of true magic. And those formulas, they had advanced versions. A rank 1 mage in Aurora's system could use rank 1 fireball spell, and so could a rank 2 mage. But even with precise manual control, there were still limitations. However, with greater knowledge, one could modify the spell modeled magic circle to cast the same fireball spell, but in a far more powerful form. Awakeners could do this too. In truth, the skills Michael had were all basic versions. If he could learn how to modify them, his system panel would automatically update, allowing him to cast both the old and new versions at will. It was like upgrading a framework. The more knowledge he accumulated and the stronger he became, the more he began to understand the fundamental differences between Awakeners and cultivators. Cultivators were incredibly powerful, and in some ways, they felt like supernaturals operating under heavier restrictions as if their lives were set on hard mode compared to Awakeners. Ironically, that very limitation was also their greatest strength. But one thing puzzled Michael. Disciple rank. He felt as though he had stumbled upon a hidden truth about his own world. To be honest, there were many things that confused him about the cultivation system of the real world and the awakening system, but he had always assumed the answer was simpler as supernaturals had customized their power system. After the recent chaos, Michael was even more convinced. In fact, the cultivation system of Aurora and the Awakener system were strikingly similar, except the former had more divisions. Why did level 4 cracks start spawning rank 2 monsters? Why were mastering cultivators considered rank 2? The common factor was clear: both had significant power upgrades and uniqueness once they reached level 4. Levels 1, 2, 3 seemed to correspond to rank 1 in the Awakener system, while everything beyond level 4 better aligned with the higher ranks of Awakeners. Did this mean that rank 1 to rank 3 cultivators weren't actually weak, but only seemed so because they had been divided into separate tiers when they were supposed to be grouped together as a single realm? And did this also mean that level 1, 2, 3 cracks were merely rank 1 cracks that had been further divided to match the cultivation system? Instead of calling them separate cracks, wouldn't it make more sense to label them as low, mid, and high rank 1 cracks? Michael felt like he was onto something, but regardless, he wasn't in the land of origin to ponder history. It seems that while there's no raise rank, this undead still follows the rank system, though with fewer restrictions. He narrowed his eyes. Does this mean it can be leveled up infinitely? Michael's eyes widened in shock at the thought, but he quickly forced himself to calm down. Is this what it means to have no raise rank? Or is this what it truly means to be a race? The human corpses he had obtained today had opened up an entirely new avenue of thought for him. Michael turned to look at the undead mage. Its tattered robes were dirty and damaged, its pale skin marred with battle scars. Yet, despite everything, not even the prince's last beating the thing had managed to cripple it. As Michael stared at the corpse, which looked eerily similar to a living human if you took away its wide eyes, a sudden thought struck him. Who am I? Michael asked the undead, his heart pounding in his chest. This was different. Unlike monsters, the mage had once been an intelligent being before it died. Would it remember anything? Could it still speak? Though its body was dead, the energy responsible for its reanimation also sustained it. Michael's heartbeat quickened. Then, suddenly through their connection, he felt a wave of confusion from the undead. The corpse tilted its head, and as Michael felt its gaze settle on him, a chill ran down his spine. That's a lot of movement for a question, Michael muttered, his tone serious. In this situation, it translated to the uniqueness of his new undead. Then, under Michael's widened eyes, "A master. Why you are my master?" "Yes, you are my master." The voice was dry and raspy, but unmistakably real. Michael's body trembled slightly. Just moments ago, in the real world, he had wished for an undead that could communicate. He just never expected to get one this soon. Chapter 163 Who's Your Daddy? Michael didn't know how to react at first, but just as he was starting to wrap his head around the situation, a sudden thought entered his mind. He immediately turned to look at the 4 human undead not far from him. Experience more tales on my virtual library empire. These 4 had been the ones who committed terrible acts against a couple before hiding in their house to avoid being caught by the association to end up in Michael's hands. They were humans just like this one. The only difference is that they're much weaker. So, Michael looked thoughtfully at the 4 human undead. After a quick consideration, he sent them the same mental message as before. Who am I? A second passed. Then another. Soon, several reactions appeared. Michael felt waves of confusion through their connection before each undead finally responded. Master. M-I-E-L Lord. Maz Master. D-Daddy. Michael's smile grew wider with each response until the last one. His face darkened. Who's your daddy? Michael barked at the certain undead. What he hadn't expected, however, was an actual response. You, Daddy. Michael's expression darkened even further. He wanted to say more, but he forced himself to calm down. Once he did, He reflected on what had just happened. They all seemed to have independent thought, but their knowledge is shattered, he noted. From the way they spoke haltingly at first, then more fluidly later, it was clear that their memories were fragmented. The fact that they each addressed him differently further supported this. Still, under the influence of their shared connection, they all recognized him as their master regardless of the title they chose. "Unfortunately, I can't evolve any of you," Michael muttered regretfully. He checked again, but none of the 5 human undead had any evolution options available. At least, not right now. Michael studied the 5 carefully. He usually didn't name his undead unless they could enter the netherworld, but looking at how normal these human undead appeared, several ideas surfaced in his mind. If they had something to cover their eyes like glasses, they could walk in public during broad daylight. Their human size also made them easy to transport between realms. If a purpose arises, these 5 could be useful both in the land of origin and in real life, Michael thought. Compared to his other undead, who either had odd appearances or were still developing their intelligences, one seemed more adaptable and picked up information quickly. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Michael set the human undead aside and turned toward his next objective, a griffin. After so long, though, ironically, he hadn't even been a supernatural for a full week, it was finally time to have a flying undead. With what he had in hand, Michael hoped he'd be lucky with undead revival odd this time. But first, after quite some time, it was finally time to check his progress. Status: name, Michael Norman. Class: Adept Necromancer. Level: 20. Key XP: 76,718 by 1,30. 4,551. Strength: 31.92. Agility: 43.66. Constitution: 33.22. Intelligence: 115.0. Attribute points: 60. Skills: Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses, Spearmanship, Acid Shot, Bone Spear, Slow Curse, Bone Armor, Corpse Explosion. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Class Skill: Contract Slot, 47/50. Gift: Mark of Origin. Michael's stats hadn't improved by much. As he grew stronger and his stats increased, the boost from his class and race felt smaller in comparison. Of course, even a single point now could be equivalent to 10 points when he had first awakened, so they weren't useless. If anything, his growth was now more steady rather than explosive. This was why, at a certain point, when leveling up became harder, attribute points became one of the most precious resources for an Awakener. Even most of the most balanced stat-build enthusiasts eventually had to abandon that path if they wanted true strength. In the end, stats became a serious issue for all Awakeners. This was also why dying in the land of origin was painful, even though it wasn't a real death. Even someone like Michael, who was still among the weaker Awakeners with lesser stats than the strongest, dying and losing 10% of his stats permanently would be a devastating blow. Since the body in the land of origin synced with the real-world body, dying meant losing strength in both. However, all of this was only beginning to be relevant to Michael. For now, when he looked at his stats, he was simply satisfied. At level 20, Michael had 50 contract slots, and after contracting all the human corpses, an impulsive decision that ironically turned out well, had only 3 slots left. Now, Michael wanted to use one of those slots to contract a black griffin. But considering it was a rank 2 creature likely far stronger than him in raw stats, these wouldn't be easy. The mana required to attempt even a single contract was a major concern. This was why he called up his status panel. It was finally time to use his attribute points. Michael glanced at his most important stat as a mage. Intelligence: 115.0. Attribute points: 60. I only need 5 points to reach 120 intelligence, which gives me a chance to gain a skill. For every 20-point increase in a major stat, depending on the class, there was a chance to gain a new skill. However, even though the probability was as high as 50%, it didn't guarantee a skill every 40-point increase. Take Michael, for example. Most of his skills came as rewards from his advancement quests or were ones he actively learned. The number of skills he had gained purely from increasing intelligence was surprisingly low. Unfortunately, he was even more unlucky when it came to the rare chance of gaining a skill from other stats that weren't a major focus for his class. Since intelligence would get the largest share of his points anyway, spending 5 right away didn't seem like a bad idea. Without hesitation, he made the adjustment. Oh, intelligence, 120.0. Oh, attribute points, 55. As always, Michael waited for a while to see if a new notification would appear. He wasn't very optimistic, but the next moment, when another panel appeared in his view, a happy smile formed on his face. Chapter 164 Flying Undead. Your mana is overflowing. You have gained the skill, Blind Curse. Another curse skill. Michael was surprised. More than surprised, was happy. Finally, it seemed like Lady Luck had decided to smile on him. Without hesitation, he checked the skill's description. Based on his understanding of his other curse-type skill, if this one was anything like that IME, he already had a good idea of what it could do. A Blind Curse, basic mastery. Proficiency, 0.5%. Blind Curse reduces the target's vision, impairing their ability to perceive their surroundings. Duration, 8 seconds. It's just as I thought, Michael muttered, a slight smile forming at the edge of his lips. Against an opponent of similar power, this skill lacked the slow version of its series showed its limitations. However, even the little it could do was enough in a high-stakes battle. Michael hadn't tested it yet, but he believed that if he used both of his curse skills simultaneously on a single enemy, their combined effects might result in a qualitative change. Even if that change lasted only for a moment, at his current level, a single second could decide the outcome of a fight. I wonder if I'll get more curse skills in the future, he thought hopefully before shifting his focus back to his stats. After increasing his intelligence, he immediately felt the change. His mana pool expanded, increasing his overall mana capacity, though there was no improvement in quality. Looking at the 55 attribute points he still had left, Michael considered his next distribution carefully. For a mage, the importance of agility was closely linked to intelligence. Not only was it his second highest stat, but he also enjoyed the speed, reaction time, and flexibility it granted, especially since it made wielding his spear easier and more effective. With that in mind, he allocated 5 points to agility, bringing it up to 47. To avoid losing control over his body from previous experiences, he didn't add all 5 at once. Instead, he did it gradually, adjusting to the increasing changes. The method wasn't perfect, but it had its merits. After moving his limbs for a short while, he quickly regained full control over his body. With 10 attribute points spent, he now had 50 remaining. Michael didn't hesitate and added more into intelligence. The previous 5 points were too little to significantly boost his mana pool enough to revive a rank 2 creature. Although he didn't know exactly how much mana he needed, he was certain it would be a lot. The possibility of failure and having to restart a revival process also meant he needed enough mana to attempt it at least twice in a row. Right now he wasn't quite confident he could do all 3 tries on a corpse. With this thought in mind, Michael went all out, adding 30 points to his intelligence stat. Like before, he did it gradually, this time in larger increments, starting with 5 points, then 4, then 6, and so on. A little while later, he was done. His intelligence stat now stood at 150, an amount nearly 150 times that of an average hunt, at least in raw numbers. But more importantly, the quality of his intelligence was much higher than any normal person's. It wasn't just a quantitative increase, but a qualitative one. Feeling the abundance of mana surging through his body, Michael couldn't help but smile. The feeling of getting stronger was intoxicating. He turned his gaze toward the last 20 attribute points he had left. After a brief moment of consideration, he decided to keep them. He could have gone all out and added 10 more points to push his intelligence to 160, but he didn't. His current mana felt enough. Michael also didn't want to admit that part of the reason was his reluctance to face another failed chance at gaining a skill. Just when he thought Lady Luck was finally smiling at him after hitting 140 intelligence and waiting second after second for another notification, he realized he had been too hopeful. Lady Luck wasn't smiling at him today. She had only pitied him for a brief moment before forgetting about him entirely. This should be enough to try Undead Revival 3 times in a row, right? Michael wasn't entirely confident about reviving one of the 3 black griffin corpses in front of him, and rightfully so. However, having 3 corpses meant 3 chances to finally gain a flying undead. He just hoped he wasn't too unlucky. His heart pounded with anxiety. Taking a moment to calm himself lest his emotions affect the revival process, Michael steadied his breath. After finally settling down, he locked eyes on the massive black griffin corpse in front of him. Without hesitation, he activated Undead Revival. The moment he did, an alarming amount of mana surged out of his body. So much. Michael was shocked at how quickly his mana was being drained. The rate at which his mana was being consumed by the skill was something the revival process of the commanding human mage revived a while ago couldn't even compare to. Though he had been alarmed back then, it wasn't as significant as it was now. However, fortunately, he had more mana now. Judging by how things were going, it seemed like he could even attempt more than 1 corpse and still have enough left to make a few tries on another griffin corpse even if he failed. Of course, Michael wasn't hoping to fail, but as expected, not everything always went as one wished. Rank 2 creatures are truly something, Michael muttered bitterly as he stared at the lifeless black griffin corpse in front of him. As expected, he had failed his first attempt. No surprise there, ironically. However, this was only the first, and with more mana still left in his mana pool, Michael immediately went for his second attempt. As he activated the skill, a thought crossed his mind. What if his 2 unrelated skills had advanced spell models? Aside from rituals that boosted success rates, this method also didn't seem too bad. Michael concentrated on what he was doing. As more mana drained from him and it seemed like he was about to lose another attempt at successfully reviving this rank to flying unit, it succeeded. Yes. Michael couldn't help but clench his fists in excitement as he saw his contracted slot number increase from 47 to 48. Checking his panel wasn't even necessary. Due to the new connection he could now feel with the black griffin that stood before him, shaking its body, Michael didn't need a system notification to tell him he had succeeded. It was right in front of his eyes. Still buzzing with excitement, Michael then went to check out the status of his new undead. A black griffin LV-27. Rank, rare. Name, none. Key XP, 799,345 by 3,448,414. Skills, Wine Manipulation, Intermediate Mastery, Wine/Intermediate Mastery. Air Spike, Intermediate Mastery. Air Bullet, Intermediate Mastery. A master, Michael Norman. Though he hadn't had access to the status of the Griffin before it became his undead, Michael, who had already fought with more than one of them more than once in the real world, felt the status was familiar. The Black Griffin, though it had a less impressive skill set than his level 25 human mage, was undoubtedly stronger. All its skills, too, were at intermediate mastery. Unlike his female Orsishamans that also had an elemental manipulation skill, the Black Griffin actually complemented its main skill with elemental skills, rather than just throwing the element around. After calming down, Michael's eyes shined as he stared at the flying undead. A question he had surprisingly not thought about before popped up on his mind. It being dead, does that take away its flying ability, right? To be honest, Michael felt this wasn't likely, but he couldn't help but think about it. Fly. He immediately commanded the Black Griffin mentally. Though they were in a forest, it wasn't one dense with trees and had quite a few open areas around that could even comfortably accommodate the huge bodies of the griffin like the one in front of him. The moment Michael gave his command, the undead in front of him did not hesitate. It crouched down and added strength to its forelimbs. After doing so, it gave itself a powerful jump and threw itself out of the coverage of the surrounding trees. Under Michael's intense gaze, he watched as the undead griffin spread out its wings and flapped them, creating a gust of wind, and shot up to the sky. It twirled around in the sky for a moment before coming to fly above Michael's location. It was in the air. It flew. It didn't fall. Michael's calm heart once again started beating fast. Just a few days ago, he had fantasized about having a flying undead, and to think he got one so soon. Continue your journey with my virtual library empire. Haha. A sudden thought appeared in Michael's mind. This undead, the Black Griffin flying above him. He wanted to ride it. Chapter 165 Flying. Undead. For most people, the immediate response to such a term was evil, darkness, unclean. Michael had been no different before he became a necromancer. A part of him had once thought he'd be stuck with rotting, foul-smelling corpses and brittle skeletons. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. His undead weren't decaying husks that looked like they'd fall apart at any moment. To be honest, all of them exuded a certain kind of strange beauty. Like the Black Griffin soaring through the sky now, under the moonlight, it looked exceptionally picturesque. I must have been too close to nothing but corpses these past few days to think like this, Michael muttered. And it wasn't like he was wrong. If there was one thing he had been far too familiar with this past week, it was dead bodies. Hundreds upon hundreds, until there reached thousands. If his pre-awakening mindset had remained the same despite everything he had witnessed in such a short amount of time, that would have been the real surprise. Since he had already decided to ride the undead griffin, Michael wasted no time. Adding strength to his legs, he launched himself forward. His first step took him onto a tree branch. Using it as a foothold, he propelled himself again, soaring toward the highest branch of another tree. And with one final push, Michael burst out of the dense forest canopy and into the night sky where he landed gracefully on the griffin's back. The body of the undead griffin was massive. Even with his tall frame, Michael felt small on its back. Since this was his first time riding a flying creature, it took him a few seconds to adapt to the up-and-down movement of the griffin's flight. However, once he did, Michael no longer hesitated. He gripped the griffin's neck area tightly with both hands and gave it a mental command. Fly up. The moment the griffin received the command, it reacted instantly. It dashed straight into the night sky. The speed was incredible. Michael was caught off guard, as everything below blurred past him in an instant. Before he knew it, he and his undead had already soared above the clouds. Stop here, Michael commanded, and the griffin obeyed immediately. Michael wasn't a genius in science, but he still knew a few things. The higher the altitude, the thinner the oxygen, and right now, above the clouds, it should be nearly non-existent. At first, Michael thought he would be affected. He was about to order his undead to descend. Immediately, then he paused. He took a breath. He felt nothing. Not in the sense that he was suffocating, but rather, he didn't feel the need to breathe at all. A realization dawned on him. I guess it's to be expected. I'm not exactly an ordinary human anymore. If someone with more than 30 times the constitution of a normal human still had the same limitations, then the supernatural world would be nothing but a scam. Since he could breathe just fine, or rather, didn't need to breathe at all, Michael was in no hurry to descend. As for his undead, it was a dead being. Oxygen was irrelevant. And even if it had been alive, at this level, it likely wouldn't have been affected either. Now that he was high above the ground, Michael could see much farther than he ever could from the surface. Your journey continues with my virtual library empire. This world is huge. Honestly, he would have thought the same, even if he were still on Earth. At a certain point, everything just looked endlessly vast. But what truly caught his attention were the traces of civilization in the distance. Beyond the walled gathering near where he had left his undead, he could now see even more settlements. Clearly, he was no longer outside of civilization. He was heading deeper into it. Michael recalled something and turned to look behind him. In the direction he was looking, far in the distance, lay the ruins that had served as his initial arrival point in the land of origin. Due to the vast distance, he couldn't see anything, but he knew the direction was right. A thought came to Michael. For a moment, he considered flying there, but just as quickly as the thought appeared, it vanished. It seems I might have gotten myself a heart demon. Michael called it that because it felt like the perfect term for his situation rather than PTSD. There were 2 times Michael had felt the presence of death since he became an awakener, and surprisingly, both had been in the land of origin. The first was his very first battle. The second was his encounter with a corrupted being in the Black Tower. The latter had left a much deeper impact, because unlike the first, even his system had warned him that he would truly die. Several system panels, which were usually calm blue, had turned blood red, signaling imminent death. That incident had left a mark on Michael, and it wasn't until now that he realized what he thought he had moved past was merely forgotten. Perhaps this was his way of coping. Then again, it had only been a day since the incident. If he had truly been unaffected, that would have been remarkable. But the fact that he wasn't, it simply meant he wasn't that mentally strong. Still, it doesn't matter if I have to do it scared. I will do it. For personal reasons, Michael knew he would have to face that monster one day. Unfortunately, he was too weak right now. But not for long. At first, he hadn't been sure if that corrupted monster was truly a rank 2 creature. But after witnessing the strength of a king-rank cultivator in the real world, Vo was said to be comparable to a rank 3 awakener. Michael was now certain that monster was rank 2. What he didn't know was how strong it was within that rank. But in the end, that didn't matter, because Michael had never stopped growing stronger, and he had no intention of slowing down now. Chapter 166 Burying Works. Right? Michael thought for a while and didn't immediately command his undead to descend from the sky. Up here, there were a few things he could and wanted to do. For one, he hadn't had his fill of flying yet. Though Michael found himself trembling slightly whenever he saw the distance between him and the ground, he still enjoyed the feeling of cutting through the wind. Fly a little lower. Michael commanded his undead while also guiding it toward the sky, above the settlement he had planned to enter the previous day. Though he couldn't see everything clearly from this height, Michael could still make out a few details. It's quite huge. That was his first impression. The entire settlement was walled off in an almost but not quite perfect circle. Several stone buildings stood alongside residential structures. Based on the territorial size, Michael estimated this place was probably a town. As for the number of people living inside, that was something he didn't bother guessing. Even though it was late at night, several buildings still had light coming from their windows. Some streets were also lit up. As he observed the town below, he made sure to keep his distance and not go any lower. Only the heavens knew if they had weapons capable of shooting him down. Stay updated via my virtual library empire. This was his first interaction with civilization in the land of origin, so he remained cautious. Fortunately, the griffin he rode on just happened to have a dark appearance. Even if some people noticed him, the distance between them ensured that he and his undead would likely appear no larger than a bird. Not to mention, the dark night sky helped conceal them even further. After flying several laps around the town, Michael finally ordered his undead to return to the surface. Landing near where his other undead were, Michael reluctantly got off the griffin. He gazed at it, a small smile forming at the edge of his lips. I won't even bother using undead summoning on you right now and ruin my mood. Michael had never been a fan of his luck, and given that his mana was limited, unless he miraculously succeeded on his first attempt, he doubted he could manage more than to try at best. Rather than risk failure, it was better to find another corpse to revive and fill all his contract slots for more evolution points. As for evolving the undead griffin, it wasn't that Michael was tempted to do it. At level 27, the griffin was just one level away from reaching the maximum level its potential allowed. Thanks to his experiment with Prince, Michael knew that if he evolved the griffin now, the increase in strength would be massive. But that was one of the reasons why he held back. Aside from the fact that he was saving evolution points for tomorrow he would receive more and attempt to evolve one of his human undead, there were other reasons as well. For one, a stronger undead would only mean an even lower success rate when trying to use undead summoning on it. And more importantly, Michael worried that evolving the griffin would drastically increase its size, which would make things highly inconvenient. One particular concern stood out. While the black griffin was already huge, it could still barely squeeze into his storage space. That meant he could bring it into the real world if needed. But if it grew any larger, that option would be completely cut off. Sure, he would gain more strength as a necromancer if his undead got stronger, but right now, Michael was in no dire need of power. If he was, none of these reasons would have stopped him. For now, aside from wanting to fill his last contract slots, Michael was also considering what to do with the rest of the corpses around him. The situation in the real world didn't seem like the best time to be buying and selling corpses like it was a normal day, and Michael wasn't interested in doing that anyway. Unfortunately, he still hadn't thought of a better way to store and preserve them. If only the space in my mark of origin was bigger. If that were the case, it would be the best solution. The time freeze effect inside the mark storage only made it even more ideal. Unfortunately, Michael also didn't have an undead with powers that could preserve corpses. Even if he did, would he just leave them out in the open? Never thought I would think so much about corpse-related matters, aside from how they're buried. Michael muttered absent-mindedly, lost in thought, before coming to a halt. He turned his gaze downward, staring at the cold soil beneath his feet, then bent down to scoop up a handful. Cold. That was expected. Monster corpses, though, start to rot after a while. But if I bury them deep enough, not only will they be hidden, they'll also be preserved for a bit, right? The thought wouldn't leave his mind. It just made sense. Corpses were meant to be buried, and when needed, unearthed. A worried smile tugged at Michael's lips as he spoke softly. My old image of necromancers had them digging up coffins. To think I'd be the one creating them. Once again, Michael felt like a fake necromancer. Though he wasn't certain if this method would actually work, he still wanted to try it. At worst, the bodies would rot slightly and start to smell, but once they were turned into undead, the process of decay would halt due to the necromantic energy sustaining them, keeping them in a functioning state. I should have thought of this sooner. Michael sighed in mild frustration. That said, even if he wanted to test this method, there was something he needed to do first. Fill up all his contract slots. Chapter 167, Entering Civilization. With 2 contract slots left to fill, Michael didn't really have a lot of freedom to choose randomly. Currently, He had 4 corpses to choose from. The hobgoblins he had taken from the real world. The long-armed monkeys and sand scorpions he had also collected from the same place. And the black griffin. Among the 4 types, Michael still had at least 3 for each corpse but only 2 for the black griffin. It was also this particular group that Michael wasn't exactly excited to try. Just because he succeeded with the first corpse didn't blind Michael. Putting luck aside, experience told him he might very well just waste his time using Undead Revival and resting to recover mana and still fail at reviving even 1 out of the 2 undead. Putting this aside as well, though the successful revival of a black griffin would very well give him more undead with rank to prowess. That was just it. At rank 1, he didn't think he'd be able to have a successful attempt at undead summoning on them, which also meant he would have to keep off evolving them, as that would only make things harder. And though rank 2 prowess was powerful, it wasn't like Michael didn't already have this. Lucky and Prince, any of the 2, could compete against early-stage rank 2 creatures and still win. Also, with his other high-leveled undead, thanks to the chaos that happened in the real world, with a little bit of evolution points to spend, he'd have several 3-star rank undead with rank 2 prowess. To be honest, for Michael, the greatest attraction the black griffins had for him was their ability to fly, and he wasn't sure how long such attraction would last. This was because of the words he had heard from Brian before they separated and the sight of the man flying itself. Unfortunately, the forum didn't provide much detail about the power increase or uniqueness of rank 2 Awakeners compared to rank 1 and unranked Awakeners, aside from the greater increase in stats and more skills gained. As for flying, Michael wasn't sure, but he hoped that would be the case. With his mind not really at the idea of attempting to revive the 2 black griffins, Michael turned to the other 3 corpses types he had. Anyway, he could always attempt it later when he got more stronger and when he was at a higher level. After thinking about it for a while, Michael later chose the last 2 monsters he wanted to use and fill up his contract slots, the long-armed monkey and the sand scorpion. Though they both only had 1 skill, which were each interesting. Together with this, the main reason Michael chose them was because he had enough orcs in his army for now. Michael wasn't a specialist necromancer. Though he'd love to have more than 1 of the same undead in his army, it wasn't to the point he was obsessed with it. If he saw 5 birds and 5 lizards, and he particularly loved birds, he'd choose 3 birds and 2 lizards. The only time he'd choose only 1 was if he was wager broke. At that point, the cheaper option just looked way more attractive. After making his decision, Michael didn't waste any more time and immediately started using Undead Revival on the corpses of the long-armed monkey and the sand scorpion. It wasn't until more than half an hour later that Michael was done. For the long-armed monkeys, he succeeded at his 3rd corpse and the 2nd attempt out of the 3 chances he had with the 1, and for the sand scorpions, he succeeded in the 3rd attempt with the 1st corpse. Though he later ended up filling his contract slots, Michael wasn't satisfied with the success rate. Have I killed you much? I've accumulated some bad energy. Remembering the ghost he brought peace to, Michael didn't feel his thoughts were impossible. Remembering the ghost he had apparently brought peace to without seeing them also made Michael develop some thoughts. For one, but seemed a class and a panel with the ability to level up wasn't all there was to an Awakener. Though the world resembled a game to them, it obviously worked outside of a game. The limitations that games had didn't exist in this supernatural universe. Ghosts? Huh? I wonder if it's possible to contract one in the future. Michael felt his thoughts were a bit ambitious, but perhaps it shouldn't be impossible. With a class that dealt with death, if he couldn't do it at rank 1, didn't mean it was impossible at higher stages. With the matter of his contract slots being filled finally done, Michael then went to the next matter at hand. Preserving his corpse collection. Well, rather than calling it preserving, in its bare form, he just wanted to bury them. Fortunately, he had the perfect undead for the job. A female ORC shaman with earth manipulation skills. With her abilities, Michael saw the possibility of this task being a lot easier. Since the Earth Shaman wasn't one he was able to summon at any time from the Netherworld, Michael tugged on his connection with her and commanded her to come to his location. When she did, they immediately got to work. The ground vibrated, and a hole slowly appeared, just as Michael had thought. With his Earth Shaman, burying the corpses became a lot easier. With the undead ORC by his side, Michael started to bury his corpse collection one by one. With the vitality of a monster, monsters didn't rot that fast, but it was only in relation to higher-level monsters. For lower-level ones, it was only slow at most. At least Michael could already start to smell somewhat scent from some of the corpses when he moved them into the earth holes his Earth Shaman made. Hopefully, their bodies are able to stay relatively complete, Michael muttered as he stared at his surroundings. With a little attempt at clearing traces of his Earth Shaman's undead use of magic, one wouldn't even know there were monster corpses buried underneath. At least in the operation of storing the corpses, burying them was a successful method. As for worrying about the completeness of the corpses when he needed them, Michael wasn't really concerned. For one, the transformation into an undead, especially to a flesh undead, healed the body a little, which was why the stitched monster corpses he brought from the association had no issues. And if his suspicion about his talent healing his undead through evolution was true, he only needed materials for creating undead and not how complete they were, as long as it worked. Discover more stories at my virtual library empire. Phew, I guess it's finally that time. With anything related to unused corpses out of the way, there was only one thing left now: entering civilization for the first time in the land of origin. Michael stared at his outfit. Aside from looking a little dirty, he still looked presentable. At least to him, he did. The black leather coat he wore also made him look quite not out of place, if the fashion style, if the pur of the land of origin he was in was the medieval era. So, all in all, Michael didn't have any issues with himself. However, when it came to his undead, things became a little tricky. I could have the human mage follow me as he looks more human than any of my undead, but unfortunately, he himself is not presentable. Unfortunately, Michael hadn't brought a lot of disguise cloth. The human mage, not only was it dirty looking, but its leather armor and robe were also in tatters, thanks to Prince's handling. Just because he couldn't bring the undead in public with him didn't mean he couldn't do it secretly. However, it was only the human mage and the undead griffin Michael planned to bring along on his trip to the settlement not so far from him with his storage space. He planned to let his other undead hide here for the meantime. As for his protection, he felt he was strong enough for that. However, Michael was not cocky, but even if he needed protection beyond what he could give himself, the undead that had fought with him in the real world, the human mage undead and the undead griffin, alongside Lucky and Prince, whom he could summon from the netherworld, the undead he left in this world were lacking. Since he knew what he was going to do, Michael did just that. Gathering all his undead in one spot, the cave he had used for his temporary residence, and leaving a few instructions, Michael dashed out of the forest alone. After a while of running at a leisurely pace, Michael finally came out of the forest and was eye to eye with the walls of a not-so-distant settlement. Taking a deep breath, Michael started making his way to the settlement, but not on the main road. From his location, he could tell the gates were closed. Michael planned to sneak in. Chapter 168: Gathering Information. The Lionheart Kingdom. One of the three most powerful kingdoms in the Dragon Empire. Rumors had been circulating that the old king was preparing to step down from the throne, causing a ripple of uncertainty and speculation throughout the kingdom and even the empire as a whole. Why was the king retiring? It was the question on everyone's mind, nobles and commoners alike. Yet, no clear answer could be found. One thing was certain: a period of unrest had begun to take hold of the kingdom. Amidst this uncertainty, Another major announcement shook the realm. The king's brother, the Duke of Evermoon, had declared an upcoming competition open to the men of the kingdom and beyond. However, the entry requirements were said to be extremely strict, making it clear that only the most exceptional individuals could participate. But when one considered the grand prize, it became clear why the competition demanded only the best. Treasures so valuable they could leave even the empire's most powerful figures and were rumored to be among the rewards. Yet, the true prize lay elsewhere. The winner would not only gain riches but also marry the Duke's precious daughter, securing a noble title of at least Viscount within the Lionheart Kingdom. For a time, all eyes turned toward Lionheart, as the kingdom became the center of attention across the empire. Blackstone Town. Though night had fallen, in some places, the day had only just begun. Inside a bustling bar in Blackstone Town, a female server flashed a playful smile at the young man before her. "Handsome. Care for a drink?" "I'm broke. I don't have any money." "Then why are you here?" "For the atmosphere." A brief conversation was exchanged between the two. The youth was none other than Michael. After leaping over the rooftops and avoiding the guards stationed along the town walls, he had been anxious at first. But two things quickly reassured him. First, his attire didn't seem out of place. Second, there was no language barrier, not because the locals spoke English, but thanks to another perk of being an awakener: the ability to understand and speak all languages. Much like the sensation of using a skill, the knowledge of the local tongue came instinctively when conversing with natives. However, there were limitations. One still had to practice the accent and learn the language properly to read and write it. Awakener perks didn't cover literacy. So, in a way, most Awakeners were illiterate at first. It wasn't all sunshine in the land of origin. After wandering through the streets and exchanging a few words with a few locals to confirm that he could, in fact, communicate here, Michael took a deep breath and stepped into a nearby establishment. A bar inn. His goal? To gather information. To be honest, Michael's decision was influenced by the entertainment he had consumed on Earth. Whenever a character arrived at a new location in a medieval-themed world, they would often head straight to a bar or inn to gather information. The female server's expression twitched. It wasn't that she was shocked by Michael's words, just a little taken aback by his blunt honesty. Plenty of people in the bar weren't actually there to buy drinks. Some came just to chat, gossip, or freeload from others. In a way, they weren't too different from Michael. The difference: most wouldn't outright admit they were broke. Instead, they would say they simply weren't in the mood for a drink yet. Even Michael was surprised by his own words. Though he appeared calm on the surface, deep down, he was anxious. The quick-paced conversation with the server had been a result of him simply blurting out whatever was on his mind. But since he had already spoken, he could only pretend everything was normal. Fortunately, the server didn't make things more awkward. After giving him an odd look, she moved on to another table. Michael sighed in relief and shifted his focus back to observing his surroundings. Near the counter, a man was performing as singer, or maybe a bard. Michael wasn't sure what to call him. The man strummed a guitar-like instrument, his voice carrying over the lively chatter of the bar. Michael had to admit, the song, though a little strange, sounded surprisingly good. But this wasn't what Michael had come for. His goal was information. A bar was a perfect place for people to let loose and spill all sorts of things. If he was lucky, he'd be able to figure out exactly where in the land of origin he had arrived, or what was at least going on in his current location. Continue reading at my virtual library, Empire. Every new Awakener had to go through this challenge. Michael had read about it on the forums. Even those who appeared near civilized areas struggled during their first entry into this world. And sometimes, things could be even worse. Rarely, but not impossibly, an Awakener's first arrival could end in death, all because they had landed in the wrong place at the wrong time. All of this meant one thing: Integrating into the land of origin depended almost entirely on an Awakener's abilities. And right now, Michael was undergoing his own trial. In a way, this feels like real transmigration. Appearing in an unknown location, trying to figure out what's going on, what to do next, and how not to expose yourself. Michael couldn't help but think that his situation mirrored some of the entertainment he consumed back on Earth. As several thoughts flashed through his mind, he pieced together what he could from the people around him. My wife cheated on me today, brothers. Ah, what did you do? I told her I wanted you. Ah, I now understand the type of man you are. No, you all don't understand. She cheated on me with another woman. Apparently, I haven't been giving her attention because of you brothers, so she cheated. But now I want to give her all my love so we can both cheat together with the same woman. She's hot. Yeah. Yes. Most of the conversations around him were like this. The atmosphere was unfamiliar and a bit uncomfortable for Michael. Not only was this awkward for Michael from Aurora, but also for the Michael from Earth who weren't extroverts who went out all the time, especially to places with this kind of vibe. This was his first time. But after going through a lot these past few days, way more than this, Michael found that a little discomfort wasn't so bad. He quickly adapted. Fortunately, not all the conversations around him were useless. Some were quite interesting and informative. Do you guys know the latest news? Michael's senses sharpened as he caught onto a conversation at a nearby table. Tell us, what is it? They say a group of knights from the kingdom arrived yesterday and entered the Everlong Forest. Ah? Why? I'm not sure, but I heard a terrible monster has appeared in the forest. Wait, doesn't that mean we're not safe? The Everlong Forest is practically just outside the town walls. No need to panic. Don't you trust the kingdom's knights? They're incredibly powerful. You were right. I just can't help but worry a little. Hopefully, the goddess continues to bless us. Michael took mental notes while his ears caught another conversation. They say the application for the Duke's competition is closing soon. Ah, how I wish I could have joined. You pervert. I'm pretty sure you're old enough to be the prince's father. Hey, I'm old, but I'm not that old. Whatever. Even if you weren't too old, what would you even do in the competition? If someone throws a fireball at you, are you going to lick it? Laughter followed that statement. Then another voice spoke. I've decided to travel to the big city, brother. Ah, why? I don't want to die a farmer. I want to be an adventurer. I want to join the Adventurers Guild, hunt monsters, and create a story that bards will sing for centuries. The last speaker sounded young, drunk, and full of dreams. Kingdom Knights, the Duke's competition, the Adventurers Guild. Michael absorbed every piece of information. However, out of everything he had heard, what concerned him the most was the first conversation. They're not talking about that monster from the ruins, right? He wasn't sure, but something told him it was probably the case. There were many possibilities. For one, the monster could have left its original location. Another possibility was that the battle in the ruinous fight alongside Lucky, combined with the prince's desperate last struggle, might have drawn attention. The mana usage had been immense, after all, but as much as the thought worried Michael, there was nothing he could do about it. Against that monster, he was still too weak. Even if he had a strong undead by his side, Michael knew that he needed to grow stronger personally too. After all, he had nearly died to a monster that had barely been conscious. Chapter 169 Old Mage. I wonder how strong these Kingdom Knights are and if they can actually kill that monster. Michael was naturally curious. Unfortunately, there was no one he could ask currently. Questions like the power system of the place he was in, the history, and so on were things that could easily make him suspicious. For now, he had to take it slow. And if those knights actually managed to take down that monster, Michael could only hope they left some materials for him to take into the real world and sell. It would be better if they left the tower building one and just took the monster. Evidently, even with millions in his account, Michael still prioritized profit over revenge. As several thoughts flashed through Michael's mind, he continued listening in on the conversations in the bar before heading out moments later when he felt he had heard enough and was already drawing attention as the only guy on his counter table who also didn't order any drinks. To be honest, Michael would have loved to order some. He saw the bar served warm milk plus meals with meat, but unfortunately, a millionaire on Aurora, a broke man in the land of origin, was what he was. Outside the bar, Michael entered a dark alley and flashed away from his location. A moment later, he appeared outside the settlement walls. In that short moment, Michael had run through the city, and, aside from one feeling he got from the building in the settlement center, nobody else gave him a feeling of threat. This and the fact that there were also no other noteworthy establishments to enter again made him realize he needed to change his approach. Not only did he lack money, but he also lacked identity. This is going to be a problem. I need money if I want to integrate better into civilization. More importantly, an identity with some form of background I can use anywhere. But the issue is I don't even know where I am. The fact Michael also sensed a presence not any weaker than him individually also made him realize that this wasn't a place he could run tyrant in, and not that he planned to. However, it did make him know that there were at least people as strong as him in this place he found himself in. Maybe as long as he didn't bring his strongest undead out. That youth mentioned something like an adventure, based on his following words. If I register in this guild, I assume is some form of organization almost everyone can join if they're capable. That should provide some form of identity for me, right? Michael seriously pondered his next step, and he felt this was most likely the part he'd end up taking. He came out of the settlement because he didn't see any need there, and as he didn't also have a place to stay, he figured it was best he came back outside. But what do I do now? At this point, Michael felt if he actually wanted to make actual progress in integrating into this world, he might need to interact with the people of this world in daytime and not nighttime. Just as Michael was falling deeper into thought, he suddenly sensed a presence and turned to look in a certain direction in the forest he was in. Oh, I didn't think you'd notice me even with my concealing magic. You were quite strong. Boy, who are you? From behind the cover of a tree came an old man whose back was slightly hunched, and he had a black staff that strangely had red, glowing vines on its body with a small, slightly glowing dim orb on top of its end. The man had a wide goatee and long white hair and was dressed in a long, red robe that covered his body. A mage. Michael wondered. Though on the surface, he looked calm, he was already on guard. The old mage's aura felt familiar. It was exactly the one he had felt in the middle of the settlement he was just in. Who are you? Michael asked calmly. Oh, I should be asking this, the old man replied. When I came to this town yesterday, I didn't feel an aura this strong. You can't blame me for thinking something suspicious is going on when I suddenly felt one this late at night, and one that seemed to be peeking around as well. As the old mage spoke, the smiling expression on his face slowly became serious. Michael could sense a huge amount of mana, no less than his own, coming from the other party, which made him serious as he gradually returned the action, managing to score an expression of surprise from the other party, which Michael caught. However, what surprised him was why the man, who suddenly seemed to be ready to fight, started to calm down. He doesn't want to risk fighting. Michael wondered, but he didn't bring his guard down. His hands were already stretched out a little, ready to summon Lucky at any given moment. Before the old mage spoke, Michael beat him to it. From the other party's previous words, he could tell where he had gone wrong. His intention of searching for information in the city had been too obvious. People weaker than him might not notice, but it was a different story for people with similar power or certain capabilities. Your journey continues with my virtual library empire. I apologize, since it seems my intention has been misunderstood, which caused you to raise your guard. I mean no harm, Michael said. If your excellency says this, then I have no reason not to believe, the old mage replied. I hope you forgive this old man and don't blame him for his intention. I was assigned by the king to guard this place, and I am not trying to be rude, sir, but your energy doesn't really give the best impression. The old man said with a bow, adding, I wonder which family of the empire your excellency is from? Are you also here for the Duke of Evermoon competition? For a moment, Michael was confused, but immediately, he understood what was happening a second later. It seemed like someone had mistaken his identity. Chapter 170 Grand Mage. Surprisingly, the most powerful force in the empire, unlike what most commoners thought, wasn't the royal family. They were certainly among the most powerful, but if one was to take away their command over the subjects they ruled, they were only so powerful and, in fact, were weaker compared to some forces. One of such examples was the Adventurer Guild. Not only did it have its traces all around the empire, but it also had its traces beyond the empire. Then there were some families that also had powers that could compare to the empire's royal family and not lose out. These forces were so strong that some even had histories longer than the empire. And something that these forces were usually known for was their ability to birth monstrous geniuses or cultivate them. What Michael didn't know was that the old mage had mistaken him as one of these monstrous geniuses. This was not Aurora, though rare. There were hundreds of thousands of awakens just like Michael, but the land of origin, though which resembled a game, didn't give its native the ability to see the world as one. Michael's age and power gave the illusion that he was just monstrously talented. A grand mage below age 20. At first, the old mage had thought that Michael, due to his dark, airy energy, was part of the demonic cults that had been growing rampant in recent years. But when the lad unleashed a good part of his mana, the mage was finally able to recognize Michael. This lad wasn't like those bastards. Instead, he just happened to have the extremely rare element of darkness. Unfortunately, it shared some certain similarities that one could misinterpret if they were not careful. After finally realizing the truth, the old mage then came to his senses after hearing Michael speak. Though his accent sounded weird, his power, which didn't match his age, the mage immediately realized that he was talking to someone important. And if there was the chance the person in front of him was also old but just looked young, then there was also nothing wrong in giving the other party respect. Having a strength of his level with a rare element of darkness was enough reason to give the other party respect. Meanwhile, Michael, who had gotten his identity mistaken, cautiously cast Detect on the old mage after a thought. They did not seem to be extremely different in terms of equal strength, so the other party shouldn't notice his peeking. Fortunately, that had indeed been the case. Lionheart Kingdom Grand Mage LV-29. Fuck! Michael was immediately shocked. With his experience from the past few days, he could tell there were several ways to tell the strength of someone, and one way was either through the quality of their mana or the quantity. The mage in front of him seemed to have about the same mana quantity as him, though with slightly worse quality, so Michael had assumed the other party was at most in the max level of rank 1. But oh, how greatly mistaken was he. Though he still looked calm on the surface, Michael was extremely on guard inside. With the level of the other party this big, he'd need to take out all his powerful undead to match the other party. Michael also felt a little annoyed. To be honest, Michael recognized a few weak points of his. For one, he had only been a supernatural for only a few days, and his knowledge about his new reality was severely lacking in many ways. Then there was the other one he felt more frustrated about. His lack of skills. It might seem like he had a lot, but Michael knew they weren't enough. Aside from a few, some weren't exactly useful against similarly matched opponents. At least against a true expert like the human mage in his storage ring right now, Michael would lose 8 times out of 10 at least. With his skills, he'd be able to struggle for a while, but that was just it. He'd still end up defeated, because at the end of the day, there was still a gap, especially for the one in front of him who was even an entire rank of power above him. Michael also didn't know if the power system of the part of the land of origin he was in right now allowed their supernaturals to fly at rank 2. But if it did, he was royally screwed if the two parties fought one-on-one. This didn't mean he was scared, though. For one, he was never supposed to even fight an enemy one-on-one, as that would mean disrespecting the other party. He was a necromancer, so he would fight like one. If one undead alone was enough to take care of multiple flying griffins, then Michael believed that he could do the same with just one mage. However, it would likely be more difficult. After all, this was a human, and it could think and use its brain, unlike the 3 griffins that came from the cracks and attacked simply. Though Michael felt the other party might have given him an amazing identity based on the "Your Excellency" address the other party had addressed him with, though curious and tempted to pretend, Michael didn't use it. It was too risky. How was he, who didn't even know his left and right here, supposed to pull off the identity of an amazing person? Michael loved to be delusional at times, but that didn't really mean he was truly delusional. "I don't belong to any family, so please don't use that address with me and make things hard for me," Michael said. But he didn't notice a different reaction from the other party. And sure enough, the words that came next showed that the other party didn't believe him. "I wonder what your surname is called," the old mage said. Michael sighed mentally. He really didn't know what was going on, but since he had spoken the truth, and the other party didn't want to believe him, then who was he to not ignorantly use this identity laid before him?